Welcome to Wild Side, your wild true crime podcast.
We're your hosts, who are sisters, storytellers, and truth seekers.
I'm Bailey, a therapist who is fascinated by all weird and dark human behaviors.
And I'm Chelsea, an educator here to unearth the facts behind the cases.
We cover true crime because some cases are just too dark to forget,
and others are too wild to ignore.
We're so glad you're here, so buckle up
and enjoy the ride. What is up, Wild Side? Welcome to part 1 of this wild and crazy ride that we're about to embark on.
Yeah, so we were like, oh, we haven't done a part 1 and 2 in forever. And then here we are 30 pages deep. And I was like, we're just going to have to make this a 2-parter. So just real quick before we dive in, you guys, we want to give a nice happy shout out to a listener who left us a review in Apple, and it's SL from the SIP. I assume that's Mississippi. And this person said, wanted to say for people reading the reviews that even though it says it's a true crime comedy podcast, it's really not. I have tried to change that, and I don't know how to change it. I've edited it 100 times, and it just won't change. The person said, the short sides are more comedy-driven, but the weekly cases are very serious and respectful. I love that y'all keep intros short and save all the ad-libbing until the end. Hey, thanks. It's nice not to have to skip forward 10 minutes to get to the case. I also love the short sides and the interviews, and both of y'all, too. Keep up the good work.
Well, that's mighty kind of you. That's Southern hospitality for you right there.
All right. So this case, you guys, is super complicated. It is so convoluted. There are 37 things happening at any given time frame. So Chelsea and I are going to do our best to bring up the timeline 100 times as we go through it. Because it really is just like, oh, and this is happening in this time, and this is happening, and this is happening all at the same time, even though people don't know it's happening at the same time, right?
Yeah, so I think that it's best that we do it in a 2-part. My husband and I just finished a series on Netflix, and it was a fabulous series. I really enjoyed it. But we binged it, pretty much spent the last day of our Thanksgiving break watching, I don't know, maybe 60% of it. And man, it gets a little heavy. It just gets a lot, right? Even though it's a great story and it's well written, if there are that many moving parts, it gets to be a lot. So, yeah.
Yeah. And okay, without further ado, you guys, this is the case of Mark Hopkinson. The Valley, the Bomb, and the Witness. And there's a whole lot. So here we go. Before the events at the center of this case, before the explosions, before the threats, and the unraveling alliances, this case begins with a place. To understand what ultimately happened, we have to kind of understand the environment that shaped it, the community, its history, and the social ecosystem that defined power long before Mark Hopkinson entered the picture.
So there's an area in southwestern Wyoming known as Bridger Valley. It is known for its historical significance as a major crossroads for trails like the California-Oregon Trail, Mormon Trail, and the Pony Express. Today, the area is designated as a historic bypass, showcasing the historical sites where travelers once passed through. In contemporary Bridger Valley, which is still rural at its core, authority is less about formal position and more about who you are, who your family is, and who you know. Shaped by ranching, construction, and multi-generational reputations, power circulates through relationships rather than institutions. That's the world that Mark Hopkinson was born into in 1949. a tight-knit valley where influence was inherited, remembered, and rarely challenged openly. Raised in a prominent local family tied to construction and development, Mark learned early that rules bent just a little bit more easily for some people than others. He saw how favors worked, how disputes were handled informally, and how far a last name could actually carry someone. Those lessons formed the foundation of how he would navigate the world. By the mid-60s, as a teenager, Mark appeared to be the kind of young man small towns love to claim. Charismatic, athletic, good-looking, socially magnetic. Teachers described him as smart and capable. Classmates remembered him as charming and confident. Probably one of those who's who picture winners, right, in any yearbook. He earned a football scholarship to the University of Arizona, which was a rare opportunity to leave the valley and build a life beyond it. Unfortunately, Mark didn't thrive under structured authority. He struggled with expectations, discipline, and environments where his name carried no special weight. He dropped out shortly after arriving and drifted into drug trafficking and money laundering, which, how you drift into that, I don't know, but some people tend to find it. This wasn't out of necessity. It reflected a pattern forming in him, risk-taking, defiance, and a growing belief that he operated just outside conventional limits.
By 1973, Mark Hopkinson was serving time in federal prison after being convicted of delivering controlled substances. And it's also probably no surprise that the prison sentence didn't seem to rehabilitate Mark whatsoever. If anything, it solidified his path in life, skirting on the edge of criminal activity. When Mark was released in early 1975, he returned to Bridger Valley. And instead of arriving with like a football championship ring or a college degree, Mark instead returned with a criminal record and a new wife named Judy. Now, to his rather low credit, when he arrived back in his hometown area, he immediately tried his hands at entrepreneurship. He bought a mini mall, opened a clothing store, and inserted himself into local business. Now, an interesting thing to note is that Mark's return, along with his attempts in establishing something successful, especially in a small town, well, it started to attract attention in all sorts of ways. Young men in the valley, many who had limited opportunities or turbulent home lives, were drawn to Mark's confidence, his money, and his swagger. The sudden success Mark was peacocking really created a sense of almost fascination and influence all at once. Mark then took quick advantage of this shift in his status quo. What would be the villain of a story without his cronies? And I always think of Draco Malfoy when I think of cronies. Mark quickly gathered a trio of impressionable followers that would go on to be the beginning to one of Wyoming's most notorious and messy crimes it has quite literally ever seen. Of the many followers, there were three main people. They weren't a crew in any formal sense, but three young men who were kind of orbiting a force stronger than themselves, which was Mark Hopkinson. But each of these individuals brought something different into Mark's gravitational pull that will serve itself purely throughout this case.
Now, there are many reasons why I don't think I could live a life of crime, but one of the main reasons is it seems like you do have to have lots of friends, or at least three good friends.
Yeah.
And that's a hard pass for me. I don't think I could have that many people on my speed dial that often. But Mark did, and I really feel like it's important for you guys to build a mental image of each of these people, because again, there's a lot. It's a hot pocket full of cronies.
Yeah, like we're gonna have lots of names that come up through this case, and we just need to really nail down these people. So when you hear their names at these most random times with these random crimes, you're gonna be like, oh, that was this dude from this time.
And luckily, they're somewhat familiar names that I can pronounce and not butcher completely. Or we'll see how it goes. Jeff Green, doing pretty good so far. Jeff Green was the most visibly out of place. He was tall and lanky with long limbs that he never quite seemed to know how to work them or what to do with them. Kind of a Gumby looking guy. And Jeff carried himself like someone who'd been embarrassed one too many times at school. Oh, Jeff, sorry, buddy. It doesn't mean you need to find and become a crony, but I'll digress. He had a mop of hair he rarely bothered to comb and a habit of looking down when he talked. People described him as bright, but awkward. The kind of kid who grew up on the fringe. So this kid is, he's smart enough to get by, but restless enough to get into trouble. His rap sheet was mostly petty stuff, right? He had some break-ins and some impulsive theft, but beneath all of that was a kid just really desperate for approval. And when Mark noticed him, Jeff really felt seen for the first time. Next, we have Mike Hickey. And yes, that's his name. Mike Hickey was the opposite, right? He's a broader, sturdier type of fellow, a product of one of the more respected ranching families there in Bridger Valley. He looked like the kind of guy who should have been breaking horses, not laws. But Hickey was battling demons no one talked about in polite ranching communities. Alcoholism that ran deeper than his 20-something years, a hair-trigger impulsivity, and a desperate need to be close to someone who made him feel important. His reputation before Mark wasn't menacing, just really reckless, right? Adrift maybe, and too easily influenced. But men like Hickey, under the right pressure, can really become dangerous. Now, our last crony in this crew was Jamie Hysell. Younger than the rest, was wiry, restless, always hovering in the doorway of someone else's plan, right? If Jeff sought belonging and Mike Hickey sought direction, Jamie Hysell really just sought identity. He didn't have the stature Jeff had or the family name that Mike carried. What he did have was eagerness, and sometimes kind of a naive eagerness, right? A little reckless, a little naive. And that made him easy to recruit. He wanted to prove himself to somebody, right? To anybody. And Mark Hopkinson knew exactly how to exploit that. Mark offered attention, work, status, and the thrill of proximity to danger. And in return, they became tools, extensions of his will. And I don't know, Bailey, I always just wonder, how do you think people get caught up in stuff like that?
I don't know. I think it really depends on the person, which is the most cliche therapist answer, but my answer is always, well, I don't know, it depends. Now, to answer your question, but also for you guys listening, there were a lot of articles out there that were kind of unverified sources. And by unverified, I mean they weren't listed in the legal documentation. But a lot of the unverified articles basically pegged Mark Hopkinson as absolute psychopath, psychopath this, psychopath that. There was a lot of speculation that he hurt animals and he hurt women and all of this stuff, but I didn't really want to throw that in there. I think Mark, his character is formulated well enough throughout this, so we know who he is. But to kind of answer your question, Mark Hopkinson is one of those people that displayed early signs of like entitlement, and he was what I call like an opportunistic manipulator. So if it came his way, he would manipulate it, at the drop of a hat for whatever he needed. And he was also aggressive. So he would use control and even violence and charm strategically. So that is what I think really kind of hoodwinks and sweeps people into his orbit, is he would use those at any given time, depending on what tool he was using in his toolbox to get people to stick. Does that make sense?
It really does. And I know we talk a lot about this when we talk about gang affiliation and people who find kind of their meaning or their purpose in gangs. But, sometimes I wonder if, with Mark being charismatic, if these people feel like they are genuinely heard, genuinely seen, even if he doesn't genuinely feel anything for them, if he can kind of make it seem like that, as opposed to just like writing them off like people do in society, I think that's a big pull as well. Like the more you talk about it, the more I'm like, they felt genuinely wanted, genuinely seen. And that was enticing.
Oh, for sure. And he would absolutely have exploited these 3 quote unquote kids. He would have exploited the rural youth in that area, whether it was subconscious or conscious, by using whatever he could. So they probably had financial struggles, most of them. And even the geographic isolation played into, you know what I mean? Like the small town the feeling of can't really get out. And this is the biggest mamma jamma in the small town, right? And these guys likely just needed a leader, maybe a father figure, or maybe just excitement. And I think Mark offered that to each one of them in whatever they were looking for.
Sure, it was a bundled deal.
Yeah. By the time he resettled in Bridger Valley, again, this is around 1975, Mark was quickly making his reputation known. He would not tolerate anyone being disobedient or disrespectful to him, and he absolutely would not tolerate betrayal in any way, shape, or form. And to Mark, now this is a very important statement, to him, disagreements weren't just disagreements. They were personal attacks and betrayals. And betrayals, in Mark Hopkinson's book, required retaliation. So his return to the Bridger Valley wasn't a happy homecoming for many locals, but it was the beginning of a storm that would pull an entire valley into one of the most violent and complex criminal sagas in Wyoming history.
And that's really, I think, where we are, right? We've arrived to the disputes that lit the fuse, if you will. And that was 2 overlapping community disputes that would be the root of the Hopkinson saga. Now, both disputes appeared seemingly ordinary at first. But again, when you pair that, a seemingly ordinary dispute, with an erratic, egotistical, and temperamental Mark Hopkinson character, it always turns into something much more explosive. These conflicts were arguably trivial. One dispute involved a buried irrigation ditch. Literally, that's it. And the other one involved a sewer hookup fee, right? Wild that it's something so simple. And this is definitely the first set of dominoes to fall in a long domino chain reaction. The timeline, again, it gets a little jumpy, but I'll do my best to make it all make sense. Okay, so here we go. Let's look at the first conflict. The Royts Water Ditch Conflict is the name that it goes by, and it spanned from 1974 to 1976. This trouble actually began just a year before Mark arrived back in the valley. So specifically in 1974, trouble began when Mark's father, Joe Hopkinson, started groundwork for a new trailer court that year. In the process, he accidentally covered over a ditch that carried water to land owned by the Royts family. Okay, so for those of y'all who have never had any exposure to rural living, or you haven't seen Yellowstone, then just know that water and land really is life. Like they're worth their weight in gold in these areas. How much land, whose land, which water supplies, right? Like you kind of get the idea. So when Joe covered this ditch, it restricted the Royts' water flow and violated their water rights, which is a big deal in rural Wyoming, where water rights are legally protected. So the Roytses, that's a hard one to say, the Roytses immediately hired attorney Vincent Vehar to represent them. And again, this is an important name to remember. And with the help of Vincent Vehar, the Royts family sued Joe Hopkinson. They won the case, and they forced the Hopkinsons to restore their water access. Hence, the first fuse was lit.
Now, the fuse might never have been lit if the dispute had remained a simple civil disagreement between Joe Hopkinson and the Royts family. But not long after the court ruled in the Royts' favor, this is when good old fresh out of prison Mark Hopkinson came roaring back into Bridger Valley, right? So this is what I mean. Like all of this stuff is kind of happening at the same time. He's fresh out of prison, bigger personality, angrier in temperament, and determined to reestablish dominance in his hometown. So when Mark learned that his dad had been sued and had lost, he didn't see it as a legal matter. He saw it, again, as a personal insult, a humiliation, a stain on the Hopkinson name. And for a man wired like Mark, a perceived slight was never just that. It was always like this bigger declaration of war. And so almost immediately, Mark seized control of the trailer court development that his dad was working on and inserted himself into every aspect of this dispute. He took over the appeal, pushing to overturn the judgment that had favored the Royts family. And Mark made it clear, both publicly and privately, that he intended to correct what he viewed as a personal injustice. So, fast forward a little bit to April of 1976. Mark drove to the Royts property under the guise of wanting to, quote, work something out about this dispute. But this wasn't a neighborly visit. Mark suggested that the Royts family drop the lawyers and settle things directly with him. Well, the Roytses were like, no. They wanted to follow the legal process. They had already won. And that's where things really shifted for Mark. So he turned to what he knew, and that was threats and intimidation. And so he warned them, if y'all don't cooperate, he would construct the trailer park in a way that would make their lives miserable. So, no more negotiations. Now, it is threats.
Or as we would say in the South, them fighting words.
Them fighting words.
A month later, that threat materialized into violence. On May 6, 1976, Mark returned to the Royts property and attacked 55-year-old Frank Royts, beating him with such ferocity that witnesses would later recall the moment with disbelief. As Frank struggled, Mark's dad, Joe, arrived carrying a hammer, Together, father and son continued to assault in broad daylight, fully confident that nobody would intervene. And disturbingly, they were right. Despite the brutality of the attack, no criminal charges were ever filed. The reason reveals a deep flaw in the valley's small town power structure. The county attorney, Jim Phillips, the very person responsible for deciding whether to prosecute, was also Mark's attorney in the appeal against the Royds. It was a textbook conflict of interest. You know, this almost sounds like the setup for a Hollywood drama. I mean, I feel like, again, I've seen shows like this, but arguably, this is exactly how small community power structures exist and really can warp the justice system. In towns like Bridger Valley, personal relationships, long-standing reputations, and overlapping professional roles often outweigh legal authority. When the same attorney is both representing the Hopkinsons privately and acting as the county prosecutor, justice is compromised. And in this case, it effectively shielded Mark from any consequences and gave the message that Mark could act with near total impunity. And with that protection, his aggression only escalated. And Bailey, what song are you thinking about listening to all of this?
I don't know. Our brains are never on the same wavelength when you ask me this.
That's a night that the lights went out in Georgia. Ba-da-da-da-dum-bump.
Yeah, I would never have thought of that. Okay. So we talked about the first fuse, which was the water ditch issue that was 1974 to 1976. Now, kind of in tandem at the same time, we have like a second issue going on, which is the other pillar to this case that really gets ramped up. So now we've got ourselves a full-blown family feud. The first lit fuse on what will become a perpetual time bomb. And let's be clear, Mark's attack was not random or impulsive or heat of the moment. It was really kind of textbook for a guy like him. And what I mean by that is someone who really exhibits a lot of the criteria of narcissism or an active addict deep in their addiction. Like, no offense, but I always say that active addicts really can look narcissistic. People in recovery look totally different. When the Royces beat Mark and his dad in court, they were just doing what they needed to do to protect their land and water rights. But to Mark, it wasn't that. It was a personal attack, like we said. And arguably, this is a narcissistic injury. To someone wired like Mark, a legal boundary isn't a protective boundary for somebody. It's an insult, a challenge, and a direct threat of dominance. And when people like Mark feel threatened, they don't retreat. They buckle down. What's the saying? 10 toes down. They go 10 toes down, and they reassert control. And that's usually through, as we've seen, intimidation, violence, or whatever force they believe at the time will restore the hierarchy that they think they're entitled to. But while that fuse was burning, another one is quietly igniting.
So remember the first name that we talked about that was associated with the Royds family, and that was the Royds' family attorney, Vincent Vehar. It turns out another battle was brewing between Vincent Vehar and Mark Hopkinson, almost parallel to that water dispute with the Royds family. And this one would end up far worse. Again, setting a timeline, around 1975, which was not long after Mark came back from college and prison and his drug escapades, his father, Joe Hopkinson, petitioned the Fort Bridger Sewer and Water Board to annex their trailer court so it could connect to the district's sewer system. The standard connection fee at the time was an extraordinarily awful amount. of, actually, it was just $100. Yeah. But before that request even made it onto the agenda, nearly 95% of the district's residents signed a petition demanding that the hookup fee be increased. The board held several public meetings to hash it out, with Vince Vehar representing the district and Jim Phillips, the same attorney who handled the Hopkinson family appeal in the Royds case, representing the Hopkinsons. After weeks of debate, the two sides reached a deal on March 13, 1976. The trailer court would be annexed and the Hopkinsons would pay $300 per trailer. The hookups were installed, but Mark said, "Not around here," and he refused to pay. He told the board the agreement was unfair and made a series of threats towards its members. His anger locked onto one man in particular, and that was Vincent Vehar, the attorney who refused to back down. Vehar stood firm. He wouldn't be pressured and he wouldn't be intimidated. So finally, on January 28, 1977, Attorney Vehar filed a civil lawsuit against the Hopkinsons to enforce that payment and added a claim for $50,000. Now we're getting into some real money, and exemplary damages tied to the threats Mark had made. So to me, it's like, mess around and find out, right? The Royds conflict wounded Mark's pride. The sewer board conflict humiliated Mark in public, and together these two conflicts formed the fuse that would ignite a chain of violence to follow.
By the summer of 1977, every pressure point in Mark Hopkinson's world was tightening all at the same time. The sewer board lawsuit was advancing. Attorney Vincent Vehar had served notice that he would depose Mark on August 9th, and Mark's authority over his criminal orbit was weakening. Now, for a man whose sense of power and control defines his identity, this convergence of events and legal boundaries and public resistance kind of started to produce a combustible mix of rage and desperation. Attorney Vincent Vehar had become the immovable object in Mark's path. And in that combination of legal resistance, public embarrassment, and institutional pushback, Mark's fixation on eliminating Attorney Vincent Vehar was born. It was during these weeks that Mark made the final decision to eliminate him permanently. And by the summer of 1977, Mark Hopkinson's feud with the attorney Vincent Vehar had turned obsessive. For months, Hopkinson and his good old drinking buddy, Mike Hickey, remember he was the impulsive, hard-living local from the well-known ranching family, well, they started spending long drives together across Bridger Valley talking about ways to, get rid of their enemies. Two names kept popping up: Vincent Vehar, the attorney who wouldn't back down, and William Royds, the former water board president tied to the earlier civil fight.
What gave Hopkinson such control over Hickey, right? I feel like that's a burning question. And it's yet another disturbing layer in this already really tangled story. To understand why Mike Hickey ended up doing Mark Hopkinson's bidding, we have to rewind 1 year, back in June 1976. At that point, Mark was already butting heads with attorney Vincent Vehar, but something entirely separate, a kind of a much darker layer, if you will, was unfolding around Hickey. Hickey was carrying a secret that almost no one knew at that time. That summer, 15-year-old Kellie Wyckhuyse had given police information in a drug investigation leading to the arrest of Hickey's friend, Jamie Hysell. Hopefully you remember that name. In retaliation, Hickey and Hysell plotted to silence her. When Hysell failed to show up on the day they'd planned the attack, Hickey went through with it alone. He took Kellie to a remote area, struck her with a rock, mutilated her body, and buried her in a shallow grave. This killing was not yet known to the authorities, but Mark Hopkinson learned about it, and once he knew, Hickey was no longer just a drinking buddy or a hanger-on. He was someone Mark could control. Let's fast forward a little bit to 1977. Tensions with the sewer board were escalating, lawsuits were flying, and Mark's anger towards Vincent Vehar was reaching a boiling point. Hickey was the perfect instrument, loyal, impulsive, and now completely compromised. Hopkinson made him an offer he couldn't realistically refuse: $2,000 plus expenses, and more importantly, help keeping the Kellie Wyckhuyse murder hidden. In exchange, Hickey was to eliminate either Will Royce or Vincent Vehar, whichever target Mark ultimately settled on. By late July, Mark's choice was clear. Vincent Vehar had to go.
Then came the shift, the moment when tension finally snapped into motion. In the first week of August 1977, Hopkinson received notice that attorney Vincent Vehar intended to depose him in the ongoing sewer board lawsuit. For most people, a deposition notice super routine in legal proceedings. But again, for Mark, it was a personal attack, and he was like, there's definitely consequences to this, and he really did not like attorney Vincent Vehar. The plan that he and his buddy Mike Hickey shaped together was simple, but very devastating. Under cover of night, Hickey would approach the Vehar home at 430 12th Street in Evanston, break a basement window, and throw in a homemade dynamite bomb while the family slept. By the evening of August 6th, Mark Hopkinson had made up his mind. At around 6 p.m., he confronted Mike Hickey and told him in unmistakable terms, "The bombing will happen tonight." Now, Hickey didn't immediately set out for Evanston. Instead, caught between fear, obligation, and that weight of the secret that Mark was holding over him, he returned to his default. He went drinking. Hickey spent hours at a local bar numbing himself until about 1:30 in the morning. He left with a woman for a brief encounter and then drifted back around 2:30 in the morning to retrieve his vehicle. Before dawn, he was behind the wheel, heading straight towards the Vehar home.
Mike Hickey pulled his vehicle onto the dark highway cutting through Bridger Valley. The road to Evanston was nearly empty at that hour, the kind of quiet only rural Wyoming knows. Miles of open land, no traffic, no interruption, just the hum of the engine and the weight of what he was about to do. Around 2:45 a.m., a highway patrolman working an unrelated accident spotted Hickey's car heading east towards Evanston. Nothing appeared unusual, so the officer made no stop. But later, that small detail would anchor the entire timeline. Hickey continued on, the alcohol still heavy in his system. The closer he got to Evanston, the more automatic his movements became, as if he were acting out instructions he'd heard so many times that they no longer required thought. He turned off the interstate, wound through town, and eventually slowed as he approached 430 12th Street. the modest family home of the Vehars. Hickey didn't rush. He circled the block once, then again. He parked in the shadows and sat for several minutes, watching the house. Inside, the Vehar family was sleeping, unaware that a man they'd never met was outside rehearsing the plan in his mind. Finally, Hickey stepped out of his vehicle. He kept low, moving along the side of the house, and approached the basement window, the one Hopkinson had specifically chosen. A basement blast would funnel upward, maximizing destruction, and Mark had thought of everything.
Hickey lit the fuse, and then he threw the device, multiple sticks of dynamite wired together, through the basement window. For a moment, the world went silent. Then at 3:35 a.m., the bomb detonated. The explosion tore through the foundation, blowing out walls and sending a rolling shockwave into the neighborhood. The blast punched upwards through the main floor, collapsing sections of the home and instantly killing Vincent Vehar, his wife Beverly, and their teenage son, John. The force was so powerful that neighboring windows shattered, debris raining down across lawns and rooftops. A fire sparked immediately, fueled by the structural collapse and the remnants of the explosive. Only their older son, Tony, survived, and just barely. He was pulled from the wreckage by first responders who arrived within minutes. The moment the fuse disappeared into the darkness of the basement, Hickey was already retreating. He didn't wait to see the explosion. He didn't look back. He slipped into his vehicle and drove out of town. On the way back toward Bridger Valley, he picked up a hitchhiker, a young man who would later tell investigators that the riot occurred between somewhere of the roundabouts of 3:30 and 4 in the morning, unknowingly confirming Hickey's presence near the blast at exactly the right time. Regardless of that, Hickey arrived to his home around 4:30 that morning. When he reunited with his girlfriend, as if returning from a late night out rather than a triple homicide. And Mark wasted no time distancing himself. No payment, no congratulations, just empty space, because Mark Hopkinson already knew the less he appeared connected to Mike Hickey, the safer he was.
I know we keep saying it, but guys, there are a million angles of this case happening kind of all at once. Now, before the Vehar bomb ever shook Evanston, law enforcement had already stumbled into one of Mark Hopkinson's explosive schemes. So, back on April 4th, 1977, just months before the Vehar attack, Jeff Green was pulled over in Utah for speeding while driving Mark's car. The officer noticed a cardboard box on the floorboard, an orange fuse sticking out from under the lid. When Green opened it, the contents were unmistakable. 2 sticks of dynamite taped together with fuse and blasting caps. Green claimed he knew nothing about the bomb, but investigators soon learned he had been on his way to Arizona at Mark's direction, tasked with planting the device in the car of George Mariscal, a man Mark accused of owing him money. Mark and Mike Hickey rushed to Utah to bail Jeff Green out, paying $2,000 in cash. After that, Mark stopped discussing the plan with Green, and the incident slowly faded into the background. But it mattered, right? And the reason why it matters is because it proved something crucial long before anyone realized it. The Vehar bombing wasn't the first time Mark had weaponized dynamite. It was simply the first time the bomb went off.
Now, back to August 1977. the Vehar's house was bombed, and Vincent, his wife, and one of his sons were tragically killed. For Mark Hopkinson, this bombing had done exactly what he had intended. It erased a family, silenced a legal opponent, and what he didn't plan was that it sent shockwaves across Bridger Valley. But another thing that Mark didn't realize is even in those first chaotic hours was that the fuse he had lit inside the Vehar home was nothing compared to the one he had ignited in his own inner circle. Because while investigators were combing through the rubble of the Vehar bombing, the people Mark depended on started to unravel. So the cracks didn't start with the explosion at all. They began somewhere far more unexpected, with a teenage girl's hidden grave and a petty criminal who finally got scared enough to talk. In the months after the Vehar bombing, the empire that Mark Hopkinson had carefully built, which was an empire totally stitched together with fear and loyalty and intimidation, it starts to split at the seams. That fall, local troublemaker, again one of his cronies, Jamie Hysell, was hauled in for questioning about some petty burglaries that he had done. When he was cornered and trying to save himself, this is when Jamie reveals something far more serious, absolutely not in tandem with the Vehar bombing like investigators were expecting. This is where he tells the truth behind the disappearance of the 15-year-old girl Kellie, who had been missing since the summer of 1976. He led officers straight to her shallow grave and then implicated Mike Hickey and Jeff Green in other larcenies, setting off a chain of reactions that no one could have predicted. So just to kind of sum this up, the Vehar bombing, Mark Hopkinson asking people to bomb other people, and then we have Jamie getting pulled into the sheriff's department. He panics, cracks, and says, "Hey, did I tell you about at this point it was still unsolved, the disappearance of 15-year-old Kellie?" And investigators are like, "We weren't even looking for that, but thank you very much."
Detectives eventually tracked Hickey down in California and questioned him there because, obviously he's going to run, right? I think that's pretty common. Cornered, again, he denied any role in 15-year-old Kellie's disappearance, insisting he knew nothing about the murder and assured investigators he would voluntarily return to Wyoming. And then, shockingly, he did just that. The moment Hickey set foot back in the state, officers arrested him for Kellie's murder, and Mark Hopkinson understood immediately what that meant. A homicide charge was a pressure cooker. If Hickey started talking, the carefully buried truth about the Vehar bombing could surface, and if that happened, Mark's entire operation would collapse overnight. So Mark moved fast. He crafted a united story for his circle, himself, Mike Hickey, and Jeff Green, a single narrative that pointed the finger entirely at 19-year-old Jamie Hysell. The idea was simple: frame Jamie as the lone killer, present a seamless front, and eliminate any cracks investigators could exploit. For a time, the plan worked. Charges against Hickey were dropped. Hysell, already scared and unstable, was indicted instead. Hickey, he still went to prison, but only on unrelated burglary charges. To Mark, it felt like a victory. He believed he had contained the threat, neutralized the risk, and restored order, but the stability he thought he rebuilt was nothing more really than just a temporary illusion. And that illusion of stability shattered in July 1978 during Jamie Heisel's murder trial.
Now, during Jamie Heisel's murder trial that was taking place in July of 1978, Jeff Green took the witness stand, and Jeff Green started to break. After months of pressure and guilt and fear, the facade gave way. Green admitted that he had lied. He testified that it wasn't Heisel who killed 15-year-old Kellie Wyckhuyse. It was Mike Hickey. But he took it a step further, something that would reshape the entire investigation. He told authorities that Hickey was also responsible for the Vehar bombing, and that, ding, 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 Mark Hopkinson had ordered it. His confession was seismic. Within days, charges against Jamie Heisel were dismissed, and Green publicly stated that he feared for his life. Mark responded exactly as expected. According to testimony, he warned Jeff's sister that he would, quote, get Jeff. It wasn't bluster, it was intent. And with that threat, the next phase of the Hopkinson saga took shape.
Green's confession didn't just unravel the Wyckhuyse and Vehar cases, it forced federal authorities to revisit every violent thread connected to Mark. One case in particular resurfaced. In 1977, there was an incident in Utah where Jeff Green had been pulled over for speeding with a dynamite bomb hidden in Mark's car, right? For 2 years, the case had sat dormant. Now, in the context of Green's testimony, it was no longer a footnote. It was evidence of a pattern. By early 1979, the orbit around Mark Hopkinson had shifted from quiet rural disputes to federal scrutiny.
The Mariscal bomb plot, remember the failed one in 1977? That went to trial in March in Cheyenne. Jeff Green testified there about his involvement and critically about Mark's role in ordering the attempt. Both Mark and Mike Hickey were charged, but Hickey was acquitted. Mark was convicted on federal explosive charges and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. He was then transferred to the U.S. penitentiary in Lompoc, sorry guys, I don't know how to say it, Lompoc, California.
So this transfer to the pen, right, should have ended Mark's influence. Instead, it became the control center for his next violent chapter. Between April 8th and May 29th, 1979, just 51 days, Mark placed roughly 114 phone calls from prison. For a man claiming he was being wrongfully convicted, the call volume alone was alarming. And they weren't random calls. Mark was reaching out to people who could be useful to him. On that list, he had Alvin Hap Russell, a former Salt Lake City roommate, Christy King, an ex-girlfriend, and Jennifer Larchick, also documented as Jennifer Butters. And this was a young woman who had known Jeff Green since high school. On the surface, these calls could be framed as attempts to prepare an appeal. Prosecutors later argued they were something else entirely, the architecture of a murder. From behind bars, Mark was still trying to rewrite the narrative around the Mariscal case. He hired a private investigator and insisted that Jeff Green had lied at trial.
According to Mark, the bomb found in his car was not intended for Mariscal at all, but for a contractor's truck in Salt Lake City. Like, I'm so sorry, Mark, but like, hey, what had happened was it really wasn't intended for this guy. It was just intended for somebody else. Like, I don't know how that's really helping you. The investigator followed Mark's lead straight to Todd Hall, a violent criminal with a white pickup and a murky past. Now, this dude confirmed just enough details to muddy the water, but refused to sign anything. And it didn't take long for the investigator to realize he had been manipulated. The entire detour was a smokescreen, yet another attempt by Mark to undermine Jeff Green and destabilize the case.
But while Mark played legal chess on the surface, his true focus was singular: Jeff Green. Finding him, tracking him, neutralizing him. From Lompoc, he called Jennifer repeatedly, pressing her to send him a photograph of Jeff. She resisted at first. Why would a man who had known Jeff for years suddenly need a yearbook photo? But then Hap Russell arrived at her home acting as Mark's go-between. His appearance unsettled her enough that she finally complied, cutting Jeff's portrait out of her high school yearbook. On April 24th, 1979, she mailed the cutout yearbook picture, but not to Mark, to Russell. Around the same time, Mark began calling Christy King, asking her to temporarily store money in her bank account. She agreed, though she later said she couldn't understand why an inmate needed thousands of dollars funneled through a personal account. She didn't ask questions. Most people in Mark's orbit, they just didn't, right? Telling him no had never felt like a real option. By mid-May, Mark's calls to Jennifer took a new urgency. On May 16th, he asked where Jeff was, if she had seen him, what he was up to. She told him Jeff had traveled to Iowa with his mother for his grandmother's funeral. Mark called again the next day asking the same question. Jennifer told him Jeff was expected to return to Wyoming on May 18th. At the time, the conversation seemed harmless. Within days, the significance would become horrifyingly clear.
Now, you guys know I can't help myself, but it is super important to note that this is where Mark Hopkinson is at his most dangerous, organized, calculating, and predatory. Prison, just like the first go-around, is not reforming or even restraining him. It is allowing him an even more obsessive focus. The last time he had this level of obsession, Vince Vehar and his family were killed. And now his sights are set on Jeff Green. A personal betrayal, a narcissistic injury Mark just cannot tolerate. The relentless phone calls, the pressure on Jennifer, the money funneled through Christy, the manipulation of a private investigator, it all reflects someone who still believes he can orchestrate violence from hundreds of miles away using the people he controlled as extensions of himself. Even while incarcerated in California, Mark Hopkinson's influence seeped back into Wyoming and Utah through the young adults he had groomed for years. People with limited resources, tangled loyalties, and a long-standing pattern of responding to Mark's charm or intimidation. Physically confined, yes, but socially, strategically, and lethally, Mark Hopkinson had never really left Bridger Valley.
As we close out part 1, this is where we leave Mark Hopkinson. Behind bars, but still obsessively plotting, still hunting the one witness who could finally bring his empire down. Next week in part 2, we follow what happens when those prison calls turn into action and when the consequences of crossing Mark Hopkinson finally reach their breaking point.
Listen, I know you guys are sitting there being like, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, like, what the hell is going on, Wyoming? Because when I was typing this case up, I was just like, I don't understand what is happening. There is so many people and so many moving parts. It reminds me so much. If you guys haven't listened to this episode, it's one of my favorite episodes we've covered for many reasons. But Chelsea, the Christine Elkins case, do you remember that?
Is that the underwater diver?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I have so many questions. A lot, I don't know. I think the topic of rights within prison is not talked about enough. Because again, I think of the Jamal White case and the fact that he is still able to actively lead his cult from behind bars because he has unrestricted access to phones and internet and TVs. I am really conflicted with why is Mark Hopkinson allowed, like, when do we put parental blocks on his studies?
I mean, but this was also the 70s. So he didn't have social media. This was literally all done through like pay phones and letters and cut out yearbook pictures.
Well, and it was probably like collect calls. These people probably had to accept the call and then pay for it. I mean, again, that's a great point. This is in the 70s. These are long distance calls even.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just one of those things that criminals find a way. They find a way to get tattoos in prison. They find a way to make makeup. They find a way to make alcohol. It's just like that's never going to change. You know what I mean?
Well, my thing is not only is he able to find a group of people who he can manipulate and do his dirty work for, but they're probably paying for these collect calls, right? Like they're mailing stuff off. That cost money. Maybe I'm just in this Dave Ramsey state of mind where I'm like, who's funding all this? Where are they getting the finances for all this? But I'm just like, how does somebody find not 3 cronies, but then another additional like 3 more, so like 6 total people who will fit the bill, who will do this guy's bidding? What is happening?
Yeah. I mean, I ran out of gas one time, and like 3 of my people that I knew passed by me and wouldn't even like push me to the gas station. So I'm always amazed at how like people like Mark have people who are literally would bomb families for him. And I'm like, I struggled with finding people to like push me to the 10 yards to the gas station where I ran out of gas when I was 17. You know what I mean?
I think we talked about this briefly over the break where Bailey and I were like, we were raised to be such these strong, independent people that I don't think we come across as like, no, people are always like, they're fine.
True.
She's fine. They don't need us. And maybe that's a key component with people like Mark Hopkinson is this, like, I need you, right? Like, I can't do this without you. You would never hear me say, I can't do this without you. I would be like, no, I'm fine. I got it. I am like the one that mom that's carrying all the groceries, like on all of her fingers and like finding out a way to open the door with my mouth just so that nobody needs to help me.
Chelsea knows this. I don't know if I've shared this with you guys, the listeners, or not. Y'all are like, we don't care, but it's fine. You can turn it off now because you've gotten the juicy out of the episode. But I was working with a trauma therapist one time. She was like this highly like recommended, awesome somatic trauma therapist. And she was like, okay, I just want you to sit. It was like our second session. I want you to sit in your chair and like describe what it feels like. And I was like, this is fucking stupid. And keep in mind, I'm a therapist at this point. Okay. So I was like, okay. And so I'm sitting back and I'm like describing the chair to her. And she was like, is your whole back against the chair? And I was like, no, just like the top 2 inches of my shoulder blades. She said, she said, Bailey, you have so many trust issues that you don't even trust a chair to do its job for you. And I was just like, some bitch, you're right. You're good. Man, you're good at what you do.
Ain't no burn like a therapist burn. You're like, oh, that one's deep.
I'm telling you.
That one's deep.
All right, you guys. Well, we're gonna wrap it up there. There was the bombing, there's the prisons, all of that. And believe it or not, we're only halfway through this crazy, crazy ride.
And the cherry on top, there is the yearbook picture cut out. Let's not forget of all the crazy things going on. He even convinced somebody to find a yearbook and cut that out to send it.
Well, as always, you guys, thanks for hanging out with us through this wild and crazy ride.
And we'll catch you on the wild side.
Bye, guys.
Later, Gators.